Let us begin by slowing our breathing and quieting our thoughts, allowing this moment to become a gentle space of prayer. Gracious God, we come before you with hearts that carry many concerns. Some of these concerns are spoken aloud each day, while others remain hidden in the quiet corners of the soul. You see them all with perfect clarity and with endless compassion. We ask now for your calming presence to rest upon us. Settle our restless thoughts, ease the tightness that anxiety places upon the chest and the mind. Help us to feel that we are not alone in this moment, but safely held by your care. As we listen, may our hearts soften, our thoughts slow, and our spirits open to the gentle wisdom found in the words of Jesus. Many who are listening today know what it means to wake up with worry already waiting. Anxiety does not always announce itself loudly. Often it arrives quietly, like a weight that presses upon the day before it has even begun. It can come with concerns about health, about family, about finances, or about the future that feels increasingly uncertain. For some, anxiety has become a familiar companion, following them through the years, changing shape but never fully leaving. The Bible tells us that human hearts have always known fear and uncertainty, even long before our modern world. Yet Scripture also reminds us that God does not turn away from anxious hearts. Instead, He draws near to them with patience and understanding. In the words of Jesus, there is a recurring invitation to rest. He speaks to people who are weary, burdened, and overwhelmed by the demands of life. He does not scold them for their fear, nor does He dismiss their concerns as unimportant. Instead, He meets them where they are. When Jesus speaks about anxiety, He does so with tenderness. He recognizes how easily the human mind drifts toward fear of tomorrow, fear of loss, and fear of not being enough. His teachings are not sharp commands, but gentle reminders, guiding the listener back toward trust, peace, and the steady presence of God. As we begin this journey together, imagine yourself sitting quietly, perhaps at the end of a long day. The noise of the world begins to fade, and there is room to listen. The stories we will reflect on are not rushed. They unfold slowly, just as Jesus often taught, using simple images from everyday life. Fields, birds, seeds, and quiet moments become windows into deeper truth. These stories were first spoken to ordinary people who carried ordinary worries, much like our own. They listened, not because all their problems disappeared, but because they sensed hope taking root within them. Anxiety often tells us that we must control every outcome in order to feel safe. It whispers that if we let our guard down, something will surely go wrong. Yet the teachings of Jesus gently challenge this way of thinking. He invites us to consider a different posture toward life, one rooted in trust rather than control. This invitation is not naive or careless. It does not deny hardship or suffering. Instead, it offers a deeper assurance that even in uncertainty, we are not abandoned. The Bible tells us that God knows what we need before we ask, and that knowledge is offered not to frighten us, but to comfort us. For many listeners, anxiety has grown stronger with age. Life experience brings wisdom, but it also brings memories of loss, disappointment, and regret. The future may feel shorter, and the unknown may feel heavier. Jesus speaks into this reality with compassion. His words remind us that each day carries enough concern of its own, and that peace is found not by racing ahead, but by remaining present. He encourages the listener to focus on what is given today, trusting that tomorrow rests safely in God's hands. As we listen, it is important to remember that peace does not always arrive suddenly. Often it comes gradually, like the slow easing of tension after a long-held breath. The stories of Jesus are meant to be returned to again and again, allowing their meaning to deepen over time. They speak not only to the intellect, but to the heart. They remind us that anxiety does not define us, and that fear does not have the final word. There is a steadiness beneath the surface of life, a quiet assurance that remains even when circumstances feel unstable. In this moment, allow yourself permission to listen without pressure. There is nothing you need to fix right now, nothing you need to prove. Simply listen. Scripture reminds us that faith sometimes begins not with certainty, but with willingness. A willingness to hear, to reflect, and to rest. Jesus often taught in a way that invited people to linger, to ponder, and to let truth unfold gently. That same invitation is extended to you now. As this story begins, know that it is offered as a place of refuge. Not a refuge that ignores reality, but one that helps us face reality with greater calm and clarity. Anxiety may still be present, but it does not need to lead. The teachings of Jesus offer another way, one marked by trust, patience, and hope. Let us continue with open hearts, ready to receive what speaks most deeply to our own lives. Anxiety often grows in the quiet spaces of life, where there is time to think and remember. It can appear in moments that seem ordinary, such as sitting alone in the evening, driving familiar roads, or lying awake while the house is silent. These moments invite reflection, but they can also invite worry. Thoughts begin to circle around unanswered questions. What will happen to those I love? Will my health hold? Have I done enough with the years I have been given? The mind searches for certainty, yet certainty remains just out of reach. Scripture reminds us that this experience is not new. People have always wrestled with the tension between what they can see and what they cannot control. Many individuals feel hesitant to speak openly about anxiety, especially later in life. There can be an unspoken belief that worry is a sign of weakness, or that faith should automatically remove fear. Yet the Bible does not present faith as the absence of concern. Instead, it shows faith as a relationship, one that unfolds within the realities of human emotion. The Bible tells us that even those who trusted God deeply experienced moments of fear, doubt, and distress. Their stories are preserved not to shame them, but to remind us that anxiety does not disqualify a person from being loved by God. In daily life, anxiety often attaches itself to responsibility. Caring for family, managing finances, maintaining health, and navigating change can all contribute to a sense of constant alertness. The body remains tense, as if something must always be anticipated. Over time, this state of alertness becomes exhausting. Sleep may feel restless. Joy may feel distant. Even moments meant for rest can feel filled with unease. Scripture reminds us that God understands the weight of responsibility carried by human beings. It speaks often of burdens and weariness, acknowledging that life can feel heavy. Jesus spoke to people who lived with similar pressures, though their circumstances were different from our own. They faced uncertainty about food, safety, and social standing. Many lived day to day without guarantees. When Jesus addressed anxiety, he did so in language they could understand, using images drawn from daily life. He did not minimize their struggles. Instead, he gently reframed how they viewed them. He invited them to consider where their attention rested and what they believed sustained their lives. Anxiety often narrows perspective. It pulls the mind forward into imagined futures or backward into remembered regrets. The present moment can become difficult to inhabit. Jesus consistently drew people back to the present. He spoke of daily bread, of today's needs, and of the simple trust required for each step forward. Scripture reminds us that God's provision is often revealed one day at a time. This rhythm does not align easily with a culture that values planning and prediction, yet it offers a form of peace that is grounded in dependence rather than control. For those who have lived many years, anxiety may be shaped by accumulated experiences. Losses remembered, opportunities missed, and relationships changed can all leave traces of worry. The future may feel uncertain not because of inexperience, but because of knowledge gained through life. Jesus speaks into this complexity with patience. He does not offer quick solutions or shallow reassurances. His words acknowledge the reality of concern while pointing toward a deeper foundation of trust. Scripture reminds us that peace is not the same as avoidance. Peace does not require ignoring difficulties or pretending that fear does not exist. Instead, peace is described as a presence that can exist alongside challenge. The teachings of Jesus guide listeners toward this understanding. He speaks of peace as something given, not earned. This peace is not dependent on circumstances aligning perfectly. It flows from a relationship with God that remains steady even when life feels unpredictable. Anxiety often convinces individuals that they must carry everything alone. It isolates, creating the sense that no one else fully understands the weight being carried. Yet Scripture consistently emphasizes that God is attentive to individual hearts. The Bible tells us that God knows each person intimately, including the concerns that are never spoken aloud. Jesus reinforces this message by addressing individuals directly, offering compassion and understanding rather than distance. As we prepare to enter the first story drawn from the teachings of Jesus, it is helpful to recognize that these stories are not meant to rush the listener toward resolution. They invite reflection rather than urgency. They create space for questions rather than forcing immediate answers. Anxiety thrives in haste and pressure. The teachings of Jesus move at a different pace. They encourage stillness, awareness, and trust developed over time. In listening, there is an invitation to gently examine personal patterns of worry, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Where does anxiety tend to arise? What fears return most often? What assumptions about control and responsibility shape these fears? Scripture reminds us that understanding often begins with awareness. Jesus frequently asked questions that helped listeners reflect on their inner lives. These questions were not meant to accuse, but to awaken deeper insight. As this exploration continues, remember that anxiety is not a failure of faith, but a part of the human condition that faith addresses. The words of Jesus meet anxiety not with force, but with grace. They offer a path toward peace that unfolds through trust, presence, and relationship. With this perspective, we turn now toward the first story, allowing it to speak gently and honestly into the concerns of everyday life. The Bible tells us that one day Jesus spoke to a crowd gathered on a hillside. They had come with many reasons. Some were curious, some were tired, and some were carrying quiet fears they did not know how to name. They listened as Jesus looked out over them and began to speak in a way that felt both simple and deeply personal. His words did not rush. They settled gently into the hearts of those who heard them. Among the many teachings offered that day, there was a message meant for anxious minds and burdened spirits. It was a message that invited listeners to look at the world around them with new eyes. Jesus drew attention to ordinary things. He spoke of birds in the sky, creatures that do not store food in barns or plan far into the future. Yet they are fed each day. He invited the listeners to consider how these birds live within a rhythm of trust, receiving what is needed without constant fear of tomorrow. This image was not meant to shame those who worried, but to comfort them. Scripture reminds us that Jesus used such images to gently shift perspective, helping people see that life is sustained by more than human effort alone. For those listening, the image of birds would have been familiar. They were seen daily, moving freely above fields and homes. Jesus used this familiarity to create connection. Anxiety often feels isolating, as though it belongs only to the individual experiencing it. By pointing to shared surroundings, Jesus reminded his listeners that they were part of a larger story, one held within God's care. The Bible tells us that Jesus emphasized the value of human life, reassuring listeners that they mattered deeply, even more than the birds they observed. He continued by speaking of wildflowers growing in the fields. These flowers did not labor or weave clothing, yet they were dressed with beauty. This teaching was not a call to neglect responsibility, but a reminder of God's generosity. Jesus invited his listeners to reflect on how much care is extended to creation, without anxiety driving every moment. Scripture reminds us that such teachings were meant to awaken trust, not complacency. They offered a vision of life, where provision is received with gratitude rather than fear. Anxiety often arises from comparing what is imagined with what is real. The mind projects possible shortages, losses, and failures. Jesus addressed this tendency by grounding his teaching in what could be seen and touched. Birds were flying. Flowers were growing. These were not abstract ideas, but living signs of care, unfolding in the present moment. The Bible tells us that Jesus often taught through what was visible, helping listeners anchor their faith in everyday experience rather than distant theory. As Jesus spoke, he acknowledged that worry does not add to life. He observed that anxiety cannot extend a person's years or secure the future. This was not said with criticism, but with gentle honesty. Scripture reminds us that Jesus spoke truthfully about the limits of human control. In doing so, he offered relief from the exhausting effort to manage every possible outcome. His words suggested that peace begins when individuals release what they were never meant to carry alone. For listeners then and now, this teaching can feel challenging. Responsibility remains real. Needs remain present. Jesus did not deny these realities. Instead, he reframed their meaning. He invited people to consider what truly sustains life. He spoke of seeking God's guidance and trust first, believing that necessary things would follow in their proper time. Scripture reminds us that this order of trust transforms anxiety into attentiveness, shifting focus from fear to faith. The hillside where Jesus taught became a place of quiet transformation. People listened, not because all their questions were answered, but because something within them felt seen and understood. Anxiety thrives when individuals feel unseen. Jesus addressed this by affirming value and care. The Bible tells us that he reminded his listeners that God knows their needs even before they speak them aloud. This knowledge was offered as reassurance, not as pressure. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Jesus was not offering a single lesson, but a way of living, a way rooted in daily trust, gentle awareness, and acceptance of human limitation. The images of birds and flowers continue to speak across generations because they touch something universal. They remind us that life is sustained moment by moment, often beyond conscious effort. Anxiety loosens its grip when attention shifts toward this sustaining presence. In reflecting on this first story, listeners are invited to notice their own surroundings. What simple signs of care exist in the present moment? What rhythms of provision continue quietly each day? Scripture reminds us that such noticing is not trivial. It is a spiritual practice that grounds the heart. Jesus taught in this way so that peace would not feel distant or unreachable, but woven into the fabric of everyday life. This story opens the path toward deeper reflection. It sets the tone for understanding anxiety not as an enemy to be fought, but as a signal inviting trust. The teachings of Jesus guide listeners gently forward, offering peace that grows through awareness, relationship, and faith. With this foundation laid, we move toward the next teaching, allowing its wisdom to unfold slowly and meaningfully. Scripture reminds us that after Jesus spoke to the crowds, his words continued to echo in the daily lives of those who heard him. The teaching about worry did not remain on the hillside. It followed people back into their homes, their work, and their quiet moments of thought. Anxiety has a way of returning when the teaching moment has passed. When life resumes its ordinary rhythm, Jesus understood this deeply. That is why his teachings were not designed as brief inspiration, but as steady guidance meant to be remembered and practiced over time. The Bible tells us that Jesus often spoke of trust, using images that required patience. Seeds planted in the ground do not show immediate results. Growth happens slowly, beneath the surface, unseen for a time. Anxiety struggles with this kind of waiting. It seeks immediate reassurance, immediate certainty. Jesus invited his listeners to accept a slower rhythm, one where trust develops gradually. This teaching was not meant to frustrate, but to free the heart from constant urgency. In daily life, Worry often centers on the question of provision. Will there be enough? Will needs be met tomorrow, next month, or next year? Jesus addressed this concern by pointing again to God's awareness. Scripture reminds us that Jesus spoke of a Father who knows what his children need. This knowledge was offered as comfort, not as surveillance. It reassured listeners that they were not forgotten, even when circumstances felt unstable. Anxiety can also arise from a sense of isolation. When concerns feel personal and unshared, they can grow heavier. Jesus countered this by speaking to people collectively, reminding them that they were part of a community held together by God's care. The Bible tells us that his teachings often emphasized belonging. This sense of belonging helped ease the fear that individuals were facing life alone. Jesus did not suggest that trust eliminates effort. Responsibility remained part of life. Work continued. Decisions still needed to be made, yet he drew a clear distinction between responsible action and anxious striving. Scripture reminds us that Jesus warned against being consumed by worry, not against thoughtful care. This distinction is important. It allows individuals to engage life faithfully without being dominated by fear. For many listeners, anxiety had become habitual, a pattern formed over years of uncertainty. Jesus did not condemn this pattern. Instead, he gently invited change. His teachings offered an alternative way of responding to uncertainty, one rooted in trust rather than fear. The Bible tells us that transformation often begins with small shifts in attention and belief. Jesus encouraged his listeners to consider what they valued most deeply. Anxiety often reveals misplaced priorities, where security becomes the ultimate goal. Jesus redirected focus toward a deeper purpose, one centered on relationship with God. Scripture reminds us that when priorities align with this purpose, anxiety gradually loses its power to dominate thought and emotion. As this teaching settled into the hearts of listeners, it challenged familiar assumptions. Control was no longer presented as the source of safety. Trust became the foundation instead. This shift did not happen instantly. It required reflection, practice, and patience. Jesus understood this process and spoke accordingly, offering guidance that could be returned to repeatedly. In reflecting on this teaching today, listeners are invited to examine how worry shapes daily decisions. Does anxiety drive planning and action? Does it overshadow moments meant for rest and connection? Scripture reminds us that awareness is the first step toward change. Jesus often encouraged listeners to notice their inner lives, not with judgment, but with honesty. This first teaching in the journey toward peace establishes a gentle truth. Anxiety does not need to be confronted with force. It can be met with trust that grows slowly, like a seed planted in receptive soil. The words of Jesus continue to invite listeners into this process, offering reassurance that peace is not beyond reach, but cultivated through daily reliance on God's care. The Bible tells us that Jesus often returned to simple, repeated truths because he understood how easily the human heart forgets. Anxiety has a way of resurfacing in the most ordinary moments. It does not always come during crisis. Often it appears during routine tasks, when the mind is free to wander. Jesus spoke into this reality by grounding trust in daily experience rather than extraordinary events. His teachings were meant to be lived quietly, one day at a time. Jesus reminded his listeners that each day carries its own concerns. This was not meant to overwhelm, but to release them from carrying tomorrow before it arrives. Scripture reminds us that anxiety grows when the mind attempts to manage a future that has not yet unfolded. Jesus gently redirected attention back to the present moment, where grace and strength are given. This focus on today was an invitation to rest within what is already provided. For many people, anxiety is tied to the fear of insufficiency. There is a concern that personal strength, resources, or time will not be enough. Jesus addressed this by pointing to God's ongoing provision. The Bible tells us that Jesus spoke of daily bread, emphasizing a rhythm of receiving rather than storing fearfully. This image encouraged listeners to trust that needs would be met as they arose, not all at once, but faithfully over time. Jesus also acknowledged the tendency to measure life by comparison. Anxiety often grows when individuals compare their situation to others, questioning why some appear secure while others struggle. Scripture reminds us that Jesus discouraged this comparison by affirming individual worth. Each person was reminded that they were seen and valued by God. This assurance was meant to quiet the restless urge to measure life through fear-based comparison. Trust, as Jesus described it, required attentiveness rather than distraction. Anxiety thrives when attention is scattered across many imagined outcomes. Jesus invited his listeners to consider where their focus rested. Scripture tells us that he encouraged simplicity of heart, a state where attention is directed toward what truly sustains life. This simplicity was not shallow, but deeply grounding. In practical terms, this teaching challenged listeners to reconsider how they began and ended their days. Anxiety often frames the day with worry, beginning with fear and ending with exhaustion. Jesus offered a different rhythm, one where trust frames daily experience. Scripture reminds us that prayer, reflection, and gratitude were integral to this rhythm. These practices helped anchor the heart in presence rather than fear. Jesus understood that trust grows through repetition. His teachings were meant to be returned to again and again, especially when anxiety resurfaced. The Bible tells us that he often repeated core messages, knowing that understanding deepens over time. This repetition was an act of patience, acknowledging the slow pace of human change. For listeners today, this teaching invites gentle experimentation. What happens when attention is intentionally returned to the present? What shifts when tomorrow is entrusted to God, even briefly? Scripture reminds us that faith often begins with small acts of trust, practiced consistently. These acts gradually reshape how anxiety is experienced. As this second reflection within the first teaching concludes, it reinforces a central truth. Peace is not found by eliminating responsibility, but by releasing the illusion of control. Jesus guided his listeners toward a life where trust supports action rather than fear driving it. This approach allows anxiety to loosen its hold, making space for calm and clarity to emerge. The teachings of Jesus continue to offer this steady invitation. They do not demand immediate transformation. They encourage a patient journey toward peace, one shaped by daily trust and gentle awareness. With this understanding, we move forward, allowing the next teaching to deepen this foundation and expand its meaning. Scripture reminds us that one of the deepest sources of anxiety is the desire to control outcomes. Control promises safety, yet it often delivers exhaustion. Jesus addressed this human impulse with great gentleness. He did not accuse his listeners of wrongdoing for wanting security. Instead, he invited them to recognize the limits of their control and to discover peace within those limits. This recognition was not meant to diminish human responsibility, but to restore balance to the heart. Jesus observed that worry does not produce the results it promises. Anxiety claims that constant vigilance will prevent loss or failure, yet experience often proves otherwise. Scripture tells us that Jesus spoke openly about this reality, noting that anxiety cannot add to life's length or depth. His words were not dismissive, they were compassionate, offering relief from the burden of constant mental striving. By naming the limits of worry, Jesus created space for trust to emerge. For many listeners, the idea of releasing control feels unsettling. Control can become a familiar companion, especially for those who have endured hardship. It can feel safer to remain guarded than to risk trust. Jesus understood this fear. That is why his teachings emphasized relationship rather than blind surrender. Scripture reminds us that Jesus consistently spoke of God as attentive and caring, inviting trust grounded in character rather than uncertainty. Anxiety often convinces individuals that they alone are responsible for holding everything together. Jesus countered this belief by reminding his listeners that they are part of a larger story. The Bible tells us that he spoke of God's ongoing work in the world, a work that continues regardless of human effort. This perspective offered comfort, suggesting that life is sustained by more than personal vigilance. Jesus also addressed the fear of loss that fuels anxiety. Loss of health, stability, or loved ones can dominate thought and emotion. While Jesus did not deny the pain of loss, he reframed its ultimate power. Scripture reminds us that his teachings pointed toward a hope that extends beyond immediate circumstances. This hope did not erase grief, but it softened fear by placing it within a larger horizon of meaning. In daily practice, releasing control begins with awareness. Jesus encouraged listeners to notice when anxiety tightened its grip. He often used questions to prompt reflection, helping individuals recognize patterns of thought that led to fear. Scripture tells us that such awareness is transformative. It allows the heart to pause before reacting, creating space for trust to take root. Jesus modeled this posture of trust through his own life. The Bible tells us that he frequently withdrew to quiet places for prayer, entrusting outcomes to God rather than relying solely on human strength. This example reinforced his teaching, showing that trust is not passive, but deeply intentional. It is cultivated through relationship and reflection. For listeners today, this teaching invites a reconsideration of what it means to be faithful. Faithfulness is not measured by how tightly one holds control, but by how willingly one entrusts life to God's care. Scripture reminds us that this entrusting is an ongoing process, not a single decision. Anxiety may return, but each return becomes an opportunity to practice release once more. As this first teaching draws to a close, it leaves listeners with a gentle challenge. What might change if control is loosened? Even slightly, what peace might emerge if outcomes are entrusted rather than managed through fear? The words of Jesus offer reassurance that such release does not lead to abandonment, but to deeper security rooted in God's presence. This teaching prepares the heart for what comes next. It establishes trust as the foundation upon which deeper healing and peace can be built. With this understanding, we move forward into the next teaching, ready to explore how trust transforms fear into quiet confidence and steady hope. Scripture reminds us that anxiety is not only shaped by concern for the future, but also by wounds carried from the past. Jesus understood that fear often takes root in places of hurt, disappointment, and unresolved pain. That is why many of his teachings addressed healing of the heart before addressing outward behavior. He spoke to people whose anxiety was bound to shame, regret, or memories they wished could be undone. His words offered not condemnation, but restoration. The Bible tells us that Jesus frequently encountered individuals burdened not just by physical illness, but by emotional and spiritual weight. When he spoke to them, he often addressed their inner state before anything else. He recognized that anxiety can grow when a person feels broken or unworthy. Scripture reminds us that Jesus responded to these feelings with compassion, affirming dignity and worth before offering guidance. This approach revealed a deep understanding of the human condition. Anxiety often feeds on unresolved guilt. The mind revisits moments of failure, replaying them with harsh judgment. Jesus addressed this pattern by speaking about forgiveness. He taught that forgiveness is not a transaction to be earned, but a gift offered freely. The Bible tells us that Jesus invited people to release the weight of past mistakes, assuring them that God's mercy is not limited by human failure. This assurance offered relief to anxious hearts weighed down by regret. Forgiveness, as Jesus taught it, was not limited to forgiving others. It also included receiving forgiveness personally. Anxiety can persist when individuals believe they must carry the consequences of their past indefinitely. Jesus countered this belief by emphasizing grace. Scripture reminds us that grace interrupts cycles of self-condemnation, allowing healing to begin. This healing does not erase memory, but it transforms its meaning. Jesus also spoke about faith as a source of inner stability. Faith, in his teaching, was not blind optimism or denial of hardship. It was trust, grounded in relationship with God. The Bible tells us that Jesus often described faith as small, like a seed. This image reassured listeners that faith does not need to be perfect or strong to be effective. Even a small measure of trust can begin to reshape anxious thought patterns. Anxiety often magnifies fear by isolating it within the individual. Jesus addressed this by inviting people into connection. He spoke of God as near, attentive, and responsive. Scripture reminds us that Jesus encouraged people to bring their concerns openly before God, rather than hiding them. This openness reduces anxiety's power by replacing isolation with relationship. Healing, as Jesus described it, was a process, rather than an instant change. The Bible tells us that many who encountered him experienced gradual transformation. Anxiety may not disappear immediately, but its grip loosens as trust grows. Jesus acknowledged this pace, offering patience rather than pressure. His teachings allowed room for ongoing struggle while pointing toward hope. In daily life, this teaching invites listeners to reflect on the connection between anxiety and unresolved emotional pain. What memories continue to stir fear? What regrets remain unaddressed? Scripture reminds us that awareness opens the door to healing. Jesus often asked questions that helped individuals recognize what lay beneath their anxiety. These questions were invitations, not demands. As this second teaching begins, it establishes a deeper foundation for peace. Trust is strengthened through forgiveness, healing, and faith that grows slowly. The words of Jesus guide listeners toward a calm that is rooted not in circumstances, but in inner restoration. With this understanding, we continue forward, allowing the next reflection to deepen this journey of healing and peace. Scripture reminds us that Jesus often met people at moments when they felt most vulnerable. Anxiety has a way of intensifying during such moments, when strength feels limited and answers feel distant. Jesus did not wait for people to become confident before speaking to them. He approached them in their uncertainty, understanding that fear often grows when individuals believe they must be strong on their own. His teachings addressed this belief directly, offering reassurance rooted in God's nearness. The Bible tells us that Jesus spoke tenderly to those who felt overwhelmed by their own limitations. He acknowledged human fragility without shame. Anxiety often arises when individuals resist this fragility, believing that weakness is something to hide. Jesus challenged this idea by demonstrating that dependence on God is not a failure, but a pathway to peace. Scripture reminds us that his words consistently affirmed that God's strength is revealed most clearly where human strength ends. Faith, as Jesus described it, was not about certainty in outcomes, but trust in presence. Anxiety often demands guarantees, asking for proof that everything will turn out well. Jesus redirected attention away from outcomes and toward relationship. The Bible tells us that he emphasized God's faithful presence rather than predictable results. This shift allowed anxious hearts to rest, knowing they were not facing uncertainty alone. Jesus also addressed the fear of inadequacy that fuels anxiety. Many individuals worry that they are not enough, not wise enough, not strong enough, or not faithful enough. Scripture reminds us that Jesus countered this fear by affirming worth that does not depend on performance. He spoke of God's care as unconditional, not earned through effort or perfection. This message offered relief to those exhausted by self-judgment. Anxiety often becomes louder in seasons of change. Aging, loss, and transition can unsettle familiar patterns, leaving individuals unsure of their place or purpose. Jesus spoke into these moments with compassion. The Bible tells us that he often reassured people that their lives remained meaningful, regardless of circumstance. This assurance helped ground anxious hearts in a sense of belonging that transcended change. Jesus encouraged his listeners to bring their fears into the open. Anxiety thrives in silence, growing stronger when unacknowledged. Scripture reminds us that Jesus invited honest expression, whether through prayer, conversation, or quiet reflection. He did not require polished words or controlled emotion. He welcomed authenticity, knowing that healing begins when fear is named rather than hidden. In many teachings, Jesus emphasized the importance of listening. Anxiety often fills the mind with constant internal noise. Jesus created space for stillness, where truth could be heard beneath the noise of fear. Scripture tells us that he frequently withdrew to quiet places, modeling the value of silence and reflection. This practice allowed trust to deepen and anxiety to soften. For listeners today, this teaching invites a gentle acceptance of human limitation. Rather than fighting fragility, it encourages resting within God's care. Anxiety loses much of its power when individuals stop demanding certainty from themselves. Jesus offered a vision of faith that holds uncertainty with patience, trusting that presence matters more than control. As this reflection continues, it reinforces the understanding that peace is not found by denying vulnerability, but by embracing it with trust. The words of Jesus offer calm reassurance that weakness does not distance individuals from God. Instead, it becomes the place where grace is most clearly experienced. With this foundation, we prepare to move deeper into the teaching, allowing its wisdom to shape how anxiety is met and understood. Scripture reminds us that Jesus spoke often about peace in a way that surprised his listeners. He did not describe peace as the absence of trouble, but as a presence that remains steady even when fear arises. Anxiety thrives when peace is imagined as something fragile, easily broken by circumstance. Jesus offered a different understanding. He spoke of peace as something given, not achieved, something that rests deeper than changing conditions. This peace was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and sustaining. The Bible tells us that Jesus reassured his followers during moments of uncertainty, reminding them that peace does not depend on control. Anxiety often demands certainty as the price of calm. Jesus gently removed this demand. He taught that peace can coexist with unanswered questions. This teaching offered relief to those who felt overwhelmed by the need to predict outcomes. It invited listeners to rest in trust rather than certainty. Jesus understood that fear often returns even after moments of healing. Anxiety does not always disappear permanently. It can resurface in new forms, triggered by change, memory, or fatigue. Scripture reminds us that Jesus did not promise a life free from fear. Instead, he promised presence within it. This promise reframed anxiety as something that could be met with companionship rather than isolation. In many encounters recorded in the Bible, Jesus spoke words of reassurance before circumstances changed. He addressed fear directly, offering calm before resolution. This pattern reveals an important truth. Peace is not dependent on immediate solutions. It is rooted in relationship. Jesus offered peace as an anchor, steadying the heart even while uncertainty remained. This approach allowed healing to unfold without pressure. Anxiety often narrows attention to threat. It scans constantly for what might go wrong. Jesus redirected attention toward trust and awareness. Scripture tells us that he encouraged attentiveness to God's presence in the present moment. This attentiveness softened fear by shifting focus away from imagined danger. It allowed individuals to experience calm without denying reality. Jesus also spoke about the heart as the center of life. Anxiety often settles there, tightening and constricting emotional space. His teachings invited gentle opening of the heart through trust and surrender. Scripture reminds us that this opening is not forced. It happens gradually, as fear loosens its hold. Jesus respected this pace, offering patience rather than urgency. For many listeners, anxiety has become familiar over time. It can feel like a constant background presence. Jesus did not shame this experience. Instead, he offered compassion. The Bible tells us that he recognized weariness and responded with rest. This rest was not escape, but renewal. It allowed anxious hearts to recover strength without judgment. In daily practice, this teaching encourages listening inwardly. What fears are most persistent? What worries return repeatedly? Scripture reminds us that naming these fears brings them into the light. Jesus often spoke truth into what was hidden, not to expose, but to heal. This process reduces anxiety's power by replacing fear with understanding. Jesus emphasized that peace grows through trust practiced repeatedly. It is not a one-time experience, but a way of being cultivated over time. The Bible tells us that his followers were reminded again and again to remember his words, especially when fear returned. This remembering acted as a steady reminder of God's nearness. As this second teaching concludes, it leaves listeners with a quiet assurance. Anxiety does not have the final word. Peace remains available, even when fear arises. The teachings of Jesus offer a path toward calm that is patient, compassionate, and enduring. With this foundation established, we prepare to move into the next teaching, where these truths are brought more fully into the realities of daily life, relationships, and hope. Scripture reminds us that the teachings of Jesus were never meant to remain distant or abstract. They were spoken to be lived, especially within the ordinary rhythms of daily life. Anxiety often becomes most visible, not during moments of crisis, but within familiar routines. It can surface while preparing a meal, caring for a loved one, or sitting quietly at the end of the day. Jesus addressed this reality by guiding his listeners to carry peace into the everyday moments where worry most often appears. The Bible tells us that Jesus frequently spoke about daily life when teaching about trust. He referred to homes, families, work, and relationships. This emphasis revealed his understanding that anxiety often grows where responsibilities feel constant and unending. By addressing these familiar settings, Jesus showed that peace is not reserved for sacred spaces alone. It is meant to accompany individuals through the practical demands of living. In family life, anxiety can take many forms. Concern for children, spouses, or aging parents can weigh heavily on the heart. Jesus acknowledged the importance of care without allowing it to become consuming. Scripture reminds us that he encouraged love rooted in trust rather than fear. This teaching invites individuals to offer care with attentiveness and compassion, while releasing the belief that outcomes depend solely on personal effort. Loneliness is another place where anxiety often finds room to grow. Even surrounded by others, individuals can feel unseen or disconnected. Jesus spoke into this experience by emphasizing God's constant presence. The Bible tells us that he reassured listeners that they were never truly alone. This reassurance offered comfort to those who felt isolated within their circumstances. It reminded them that connection with God remains available regardless of human proximity. Fear of loss is a powerful source of anxiety in daily life. Loss of health, independence, or meaningful roles can create a sense of instability. Jesus addressed this fear by shifting attention toward what endures. Scripture reminds us that he spoke of treasures that are not easily taken away. This teaching offered reassurance that identity and worth are not limited to physical condition or social role. Jesus also addressed the anxiety that arises from uncertainty about the future. Planning is a natural part of life, yet anxiety often turns planning into constant worry. Jesus guided his listeners toward balance. He encouraged thoughtful preparation without fearful obsession. Scripture tells us that he emphasized trust in God's guidance as plans unfold, allowing individuals to move forward without being dominated by fear of what lies ahead. In moments of fatigue, anxiety can feel especially heavy. Wariness reduces resilience, making worries feel larger and more urgent. Jesus responded to this human experience with an invitation to rest. The Bible tells us that he recognized exhaustion and offered renewal. This rest was not only physical, but spiritual. It allowed anxious hearts to regain perspective and strength. Daily interactions also shape how anxiety is experienced. Words spoken, conflicts encountered, and misunderstandings can all contribute to inner tension. Jesus taught about gentleness and patience in relationships, Scripture reminds us that he encouraged reconciliation and understanding rather than escalation. These teachings help reduce anxiety by fostering environments of peace rather than conflict. For listeners today, this teaching invites reflection on where anxiety most often appears in daily routines. Which moments feel most heavy? Which responsibilities create the greatest tension? Scripture reminds us that awareness is the beginning of change. Jesus encouraged mindful living, where attention is given to how the heart responds within everyday circumstances. As this third teaching begins to unfold, it emphasizes that peace is not separate from life, but woven into it. The teachings of Jesus offer guidance for living with calm and trust amid ordinary demands. Anxiety may still arise, but it no longer needs to define daily experience. With this understanding, we continue forward, allowing the next reflection to deepen how peace is practiced within the realities of family, loss, and hope. Scripture reminds us that anxiety often deepens during seasons of loss. Loss may come suddenly, or it may arrive gradually through change, aging, or separation. Jesus understood this reality well. He encountered people who were grieving, afraid, and uncertain about what remained ahead of them. When he spoke into these moments, he did not hurry people past their pain. Instead, he acknowledged it and offered hope that could coexist with sorrow. The Bible tells us that Jesus met individuals who felt alone in their suffering. Loneliness can intensify anxiety, making fear feel heavier and more persistent. Jesus addressed this by offering presence before explanation. He stayed with people, listened to them, and spoke words that affirmed they were not forgotten. Scripture reminds us that this presence was itself a form of healing. It reassured anxious hearts that they were seen and valued, even when circumstances felt empty or uncertain. Fear often grows stronger when familiar roles and routines change. Retirement, declining health, or the loss of loved ones can disrupt a sense of purpose. Jesus spoke into these transitions with compassion. He reminded listeners that their worth was not defined by productivity or social position. The Bible tells us that he emphasized identity rooted in God's love, an identity that remains steady even as external circumstances shift. This message offered stability to those navigating unfamiliar seasons of life. Anxiety can also arise from the fear of being forgotten or left behind. As time passes, individuals may worry that their lives no longer matter as they once did. Jesus countered this fear by affirming enduring value. Scripture reminds us that he spoke of God's attentive care for each person, regardless of age or status. This care was described as constant and personal, offering reassurance that no stage of life is overlooked. Jesus addressed fear by speaking of hope that extends beyond immediate circumstances. This hope was not presented as escape, but as assurance. The Bible tells us that Jesus often pointed toward a future shaped by God's faithfulness. This perspective allowed anxious hearts to rest, knowing that loss and uncertainty do not have ultimate authority over life's meaning. In moments of grief, anxiety often manifests as questions without answers. Why did this happen? What comes next? Jesus did not silence these questions. Instead, he invited trust amid uncertainty. Scripture reminds us that he acknowledged mystery while emphasizing relationship. This approach allowed people to hold unanswered questions without being overwhelmed by them. Jesus also taught that hope grows through remembrance. Remembering moments of care, guidance, and presence helps counter anxiety's tendency to focus only on fear. The Bible tells us that Jesus encouraged reflection on God's past faithfulness as a source of strength for the present. This remembrance nurtures hope quietly, grounding it in lived experience rather than abstract belief. For listeners today, this teaching invites reflection on how loss and fear are carried internally. What anxieties are connected to change or grief? Where does fear feel most persistent? Scripture reminds us that naming these fears opens space for comfort. Jesus often spoke words of reassurance that met fear with gentleness rather than force. As this reflection continues, it affirms that anxiety shaped by loss does not need to lead to despair. The teachings of Jesus offer a path where grief and hope can exist together. Peace grows not by denying sorrow, but by trusting that love and meaning endure beyond it. With this understanding, we move toward the final reflection of this teaching, allowing its wisdom to settle into the heart and guide daily living with renewed calm and hope. Scripture reminds us that Jesus often spoke about hope in quiet ways. He did not describe hope as a dramatic change that suddenly removes difficulty. Instead, he spoke of hope as something steady, patient, and enduring. Anxiety often seeks immediate relief. It wants certainty and quick resolution. Jesus offered a different vision, one where hope grows gradually, like light increasing at dawn rather than arriving all at once. This form of hope was designed to sustain the heart through long seasons of uncertainty. The Bible tells us that Jesus frequently encouraged his listeners to remain attentive to small signs of God's work. Anxiety tends to overlook these signs, focusing instead on what feels threatening or incomplete. Jesus redirected attention toward what is quietly unfolding. He spoke of seeds growing unseen and yeast working slowly through dough. These images reassured listeners that meaningful change does not always announce itself loudly. Hope often develops beneath the surface, unnoticed until it has already taken root. In daily life, anxiety can create a sense of constant instability. Even when circumstances are relatively calm, the mind may remain alert, anticipating trouble. Jesus addressed this inner restlessness by inviting trust in God's ongoing presence. Scripture reminds us that he spoke of a peace that remains even when the world feels unsettled. This peace does not depend on favorable conditions. It is grounded in the assurance that life is held by something greater than human effort or foresight. Jesus understood that many people carry fear about what lies ahead. Aging, illness, and uncertainty about the future can weigh heavily on the heart. He did not dismiss these concerns. Instead, he reframed them within a larger story of faithfulness. The Bible tells us that Jesus emphasized God's constancy, reminding listeners that while circumstances change, God's care does not. This reassurance offered stability to those facing an unpredictable path. Anxiety often narrows the imagination, making it difficult to envision a future marked by peace. Jesus expanded the imagination by speaking of a kingdom shaped by love, justice, and restoration. This vision was not limited to a distant future. It was meant to influence how individuals lived each day. Scripture reminds us that hope grows when life is oriented toward values that endure beyond immediate fear. Jesus also spoke about the importance of perseverance. Hope, as he described it, requires patience. Anxiety often pushes for immediate answers, but Jesus invited his listeners to remain steady. The Bible tells us that he encouraged faithfulness in small, consistent acts. These acts, though ordinary, create a foundation for lasting peace. They remind the anxious heart that stability is built over time. In moments when anxiety feels overwhelming, Jesus offered reassurance that God's care extends even to the smallest details of life. Scripture reminds us that he spoke of God's awareness of each individual, affirming that nothing is overlooked. This teaching countered the fear of insignificance that often fuels anxiety. It reminded listeners that their lives mattered deeply, even when they felt fragile or uncertain. For those listening today, this teaching invites reflection on how hope is understood. Is hope expected to remove all difficulty, or is it allowed to coexist with uncertainty? Scripture reminds us that Jesus offered hope capable of sustaining life through challenge rather than bypassing it. This hope does not deny anxiety, but it places it within a wider horizon of meaning. As this third teaching comes to completion, it leaves listeners with a quiet assurance. Life may remain uncertain, but it is not without direction or care. The teachings of Jesus offer hope that steadies the heart, even when circumstances remain unresolved. With this understanding, we prepare to enter the final section, where reflection turns inward and the journey toward peace is gently brought to a close. As we arrive at this moment of reflection, it is helpful to pause and gently look back on the journey we have taken together. The teachings of Jesus on anxiety do not rush us toward conclusions. They invite us to sit quietly with what has been heard, and to notice how these words meet our own lives. Scripture reminds us that wisdom often settles slowly, shaping understanding over time rather than all at once. This reflective space allows the heart to absorb what the mind has considered. Many who listen to these teachings recognize themselves within the stories and images Jesus used. The birds, the flowers, the invitations to trust, and the reassurance of God's care speak to familiar experiences of worry and fear. Anxiety often tells us that our concerns are unique, isolating us in our struggle. Yet the words of Jesus remind us that human hearts have always wrestled with uncertainty. This shared experience does not diminish personal pain, but it does offer comfort in knowing that we are not alone. In reflecting personally, it becomes clear that anxiety often arises from a desire to protect what matters most. Love, responsibility, and care all contribute to this desire. Jesus did not ask his listeners to stop caring. Instead, he invited them to care differently. Scripture reminds us that Jesus consistently guided people toward trust that deepens love rather than diminishes it. This trust allows care to be offered with openness instead of fear. Over time, many individuals discover that anxiety has shaped habits of thought. Worry becomes automatic, a reflex rather than a choice. Jesus addressed this pattern by offering new ways of seeing. His teachings encouraged attentiveness to the present moment and trust in God's ongoing presence. Scripture reminds us that such attentiveness is learned gradually. It requires patience with oneself and a willingness to begin again when fear returns. Personal reflection also reveals how deeply anxiety can influence the body. Tension, restlessness, and fatigue often accompany anxious thought. Jesus responded to human weariness with compassion. The Bible tells us that he recognized exhaustion and invited rest. This rest was not portrayed as escape, but as renewal. It allowed individuals to regain clarity and strength, reminding them that their value was not measured by constant effort. As these teachings settle, many listeners may notice moments when anxiety loosens its hold, even briefly. These moments are often quiet and easily overlooked. Scripture reminds us that Jesus valued such small beginnings. Faith, trust, and peace were often described as growing slowly, like seeds beneath the soil. Personal reflection helps bring awareness to these subtle shifts, allowing gratitude to replace discouragement. Looking inward also brings recognition of areas where fear remains strong. Jesus did not promise immediate freedom from anxiety. Instead, he offered companionship along the way. Scripture reminds us that his presence was offered consistently, even when understanding was incomplete. This assurance allows individuals to face persistent fears without self-judgment, trusting that growth continues, even when progress feels slow. In this reflective space, it becomes possible to consider how trust might be practiced more intentionally. Jesus invited his listeners to seek God's guidance daily, not as a burden, but as a source of peace. Scripture reminds us that daily trust transforms anxiety from a dominating force into a signal that calls attention back to relationship with God. This transformation unfolds through repetition and grace. Personal reflection also highlights the importance of gentleness toward oneself. Anxiety often brings harsh inner criticism, reinforcing fear and tension. Jesus countered this harshness with compassion. The Bible tells us that he treated vulnerability with respect, not condemnation. This example encourages listeners to approach their own struggles with kindness, recognizing that healing grows best in an atmosphere of patience and care. As this first reflection of the final section concludes, it leaves us with a quiet invitation. The teachings of Jesus on anxiety are not meant to be mastered, but lived. They accompany individuals through changing seasons, offering reassurance that peace remains accessible. This peace does not erase difficulty, but it steadies the heart. With this understanding, we continue forward, ready to draw deeper meaning from these teachings and to consider how they shape our daily lives with calm, trust, and enduring hope. As reflection deepens, it becomes clear that the teachings of Jesus do not promise a life without anxiety, but a life no longer ruled by it. This distinction is important. Anxiety may still appear, especially during moments of uncertainty or change, but it no longer needs to determine the direction of the heart. Scripture reminds us that Jesus offered guidance for living faithfully within reality, not escaping it. His words help reframe anxiety as something that can be acknowledged without being obeyed. One of the most meaningful lessons that emerges from these teachings is the invitation to trust gradually. Jesus never demanded immediate transformation. He spoke patiently, understanding that fear loosens its grip over time. Scripture reminds us that growth in faith often occurs quietly, through repeated choices to trust rather than through dramatic change. This perspective offers relief to those who feel discouraged by persistent worry. Progress is measured not by perfection, but by willingness. Another lesson centers on presence. Anxiety often pulls attention away from what is happening now, directing it toward imagined futures or unresolved pasts. Jesus consistently drew his listeners back to the present moment. Scripture reminds us that he spoke of daily provision and daily trust. This emphasis encourages a way of living that engages fully with today, allowing tomorrow to remain in God's care. Presence becomes a practice that gently counters anxious thought. The teachings of Jesus also highlight the importance of relationship. Anxiety thrives in isolation, where fear grows unchecked. Jesus addressed this by emphasizing connection with God and with others. Scripture reminds us that trust is strengthened through relationship, not self-reliance alone. Bringing concerns into prayer, conversation, or quiet reflection allows anxiety to be shared rather than carried alone. This sharing reduces its weight and restores balance to the heart. Forgiveness emerges as another central theme in living peacefully with anxiety. Unresolved guilt and resentment often intensify worry, keeping the mind anchored to pain. Jesus taught forgiveness as a pathway to freedom. Scripture reminds us that forgiveness does not erase memory, but it changes its hold. By releasing the past into God's care, individuals create space for peace to grow. This release is an ongoing practice, renewed whenever anxiety returns. A further lesson involves redefining strength. Anxiety often convinces individuals that strength means constant control and self-sufficiency. Jesus offered a different vision. He revealed strength as trust, expressed through humility and dependence on God. Scripture reminds us that this kind of strength does not weaken a person. It steadies them. It allows life to be faced honestly, without the exhaustion of pretending certainty where none exists. These teachings also encourage gentleness toward the self. Anxiety is often accompanied by harsh inner dialogue that increases tension and fear. Jesus countered this harshness with compassion. Scripture reminds us that he treated vulnerability with care, not criticism. Adopting this same posture inwardly allows anxiety to soften. Kindness becomes a tool for healing rather than indulgence. Living with anxiety in this way does not remove responsibility or effort. Instead, it reshapes motivation. Actions are taken from trust rather than fear. Decisions are guided by wisdom rather than urgency. Scripture reminds us that Jesus encouraged thoughtful living grounded in faith. This grounding creates a sense of calm that remains even when outcomes are uncertain. As these lessons come together, they form a gentle framework for daily life. Anxiety may still signal concern, but it no longer commands attention without question. The teachings of Jesus provide a steady reference point, reminding listeners that peace grows through trust, presence, forgiveness, and relationship. This peace unfolds gradually, shaping life from the inside outward. With this understanding, reflection naturally turns toward gratitude. Gratitude does not deny difficulty, but it acknowledges care already received. Scripture reminds us that gratitude anchors the heart in awareness of God's faithfulness. It becomes a quiet companion to trust, reinforcing calm and hope. As we move toward the final words of this journey, gratitude prepares the heart to rest, knowing that anxiety does not have the final voice in our lives. As we come to the close of this time together, it is fitting to end gently, without haste. The teachings of Jesus that we have reflected on are not meant to conclude neatly, as though anxiety has been fully resolved. Instead, they offer companionship for the road ahead. Scripture reminds us that peace grows as a relationship rather than a result. It is something lived into, day by day, through trust, reflection, and patience. If anxiety remains present in your life, know that this does not mean these teachings have failed you. Jesus never measured faith by the absence of fear. He met people in their worry and spoke peace into the middle of it. The Bible tells us that his words were offered not to remove people from reality, but to help them remain steady within it. This steadiness is the peace that endures. In quiet moments ahead, you may find it helpful to return to these stories. The birds, the flowers, the invitation to trust today rather than tomorrow. Scripture reminds us that returning to wisdom is part of spiritual growth. Each time these teachings are revisited, they meet us where we are, not where we think we should be. This returning deepens understanding and softens the heart. If you are listening during a season of loneliness, fear, or uncertainty, remember that you are not unseen. The words of Jesus consistently affirm that God's attention rests upon each life with care. Scripture reminds us that this care does not waver with age, circumstance, or strength. It remains constant, offering reassurance that you are held even when life feels unsteady. As you move forward, consider how trust might shape your days in small ways. Perhaps it is taking a slower breath when worry arises. Perhaps it is choosing rest without guilt, or releasing a concern into prayer rather than replaying it in thought. Scripture reminds us that these small acts of trust are meaningful. They are the places where peace quietly takes root. If these reflections have offered you comfort or clarity, you are warmly invited to remain connected. This channel is created as a quiet space for reflection, calm storytelling, and gentle guidance drawn from the teachings of Jesus. New reflections are shared for those who seek peace, encouragement, and thoughtful companionship through Scripture. You are welcome to follow the channel if you wish to continue listening. You are also invited to share your thoughts or reflections in the comments, if doing so feels comfortable for you. Your experience matters, and your presence is valued. There is no pressure to respond, only an open invitation to connect. Thank you for spending this time in reflection. May the peace spoken of in the words of Jesus accompany you in the days ahead. May calm meet you when anxiety arises, and may trust gently guide your steps. Wherever you find yourself, may you be reminded that you are not alone, and that peace remains available, steady and near.